What's up, on? So basically for today's video, I'm gonna be like kind of going over like how I felt about 2022 as a whole and like what some of my favorite months were this year and like some of my least favorite months, and then pretty much some of my highlights I had this year and like some of the things I really didn't like about this year. And then I'm also gonna be comparing this year to like other years that we've had in this decade so far, and I'm also gonna be going over like some of the goals I met this year and then goals I didn't meet this year, and also some of my goals for like 2023. So basically, I'm going to be naming some of the months I thought were good this year, and then months that were just like okay, and then months I really didn't like this year. So the first really good month I had this year was May. I also liked June this year, and then July and August were pretty good. So basically, all the summer months were pretty good this year. Some of the months I thought were okay this year. January was a okay month for me this year, and then April was pretty decent as well. I also thought September and October were pretty okay this year. Not like anything too crazy, but they also weren't really bad months for me this year. So I would consider those months I thought were okay this year. And then lastly, the months I really didn't like this year. First major month I really didn't like was February. I also wasn't a big fan of March this year. And then I didn't like the last 2 months this year, November or December. So now I'm going to be naming like what my favorite month was this year and then my least favorite month. So the best month for me this year, I would have to say, was either June or August. Throughout the month of June, I went on like a lot of like awesome day trips, and I also ended up like having a lot of good Kincaid Lake sessions. I would say that was probably the best month for me this year when I came to Kincaid Lake, and I pretty much had good luck with Kincaid Lake that month, so June was a pretty good month for me this year. I also really liked August because that's when I like did the road trip and ended up like being one of my favorite vacations I've ever went on. And not only that, but like also during the second half of August, I got to do some pretty cool things, and I also got to like do some Kincaid Lake sessions at the end of the month that were pretty decent. Maybe not as good as like June, but still got to do a couple decent Kincaid Lake sessions at the end of the month, along with like going on an awesome road trip vacation. So August in general is just a really good month for me. If I had to like pick between those 2 months, like what my absolute favorite month was, I would have to go with August, even though June was a pretty close second for me. And basically, the month I thought was the worst month this year, I would either have to go with February or December. I mean, I would say those 2 months were probably my least favorite months I had this year. If I had to like pick one month that I thought was a little bit worse, I would have to say February was a little bit worse than December, even though December was not really that great for me this year. I just feel like February was just a really hard month for me to get through this year, so I was not a big fan of February. Some of the major highlights I had this year. The first major highlight I had this year was the day trip that I went on my actual birthday. Then I also like went to Union Station that night and all that. So another major highlight I had was like going to Great Wolf Lodge and spending a weekend there, kind of like a birthday getaway weekend and all that. And as much as like a lot of the February snowstorms like really sucked for me this year, there was one day in early February that I did enjoy where I got to like go sledding for the day. It was like probably the only snowstorm where we got like a decent amount of snow where you could actually like go sledding and get like a good sledding session in. So that was like one good moment I had in February. Getting to like do some like Southern Illinois trips during the springtime, like at Gardens of the Gods, Giant City, some other park with like pretty nice rock formations, and then also like the two places where I got to see the waterfalls and all that. So got to have some like pretty decent spring day trips this year. I also really liked the one day trip that I went to where I like went to Starved Rock in like early May. Even though I really enjoyed like all the spring day trips I got to do this year, I would say that was like my absolute favorite one that I went on this year. I also really enjoyed like getting to go skydiving and cliff jumping on Friday the 13th and all that. I also ended up like getting to do a lot of cool things throughout the month of June, such as Castle River, Fugitive Beach, getting to go back to like that one natural spring inside of the cave and all that. And also like having all the June Kincaid Lake visits. Another major highlight I had this year was getting to do the Indiana day trip and then also like the Merrimack day trip in like July. I think those day trips were also in the same week too, so that ended up like being a pretty good week for me, getting to do both those day trips. I would have to say this is probably like my biggest highlight that I had this year was getting to go on the 2-week long road trip in early August, like the first half of August. And not just that, but like going whitewater rafting while I was on that road trip. So that was like probably my biggest highlight that I had this year was getting to go on that road trip for 2 weeks. I also had a pretty cool visit like Bellsmith and the Cave and Rock place this year, and then Had some pretty cool last minute Kincaid Lake visits after the road trip this year. I also had some pretty cool fall day trips this year at places like that one park in southern Illinois that I went to, like in the early part of fall, and then getting to go to Starved Rock again, getting to see that place during the fall time, going back to Hahn and going to Babbler and all that. Had some pretty cool fall day trips this year. And then the last major highlight that I had this year was like getting to go back to like that one rocking chair again in like early December for like Christmas time, and also like getting to go to Union Station and see Christmas lights at Jellystone again. So those were like the major highlights I had this year and like good moments of like 2022. So now I'm gonna be naming some parts of 2022 that were rough for me. The first really bad moment that I had this year was like having a pretty crappy New Year's and just the start of the year not being good for me in general, because basically in the last week of December last year I ended up like getting my wisdom teeth pulled, and I was still having to recover from that happening, and just was not a good time for me. I couldn't really like eat a lot of like foods and all that other than like soft foods, and couldn't do like a lot of physical activity either, so it just wasn't a really good time for me, and had a pretty bad New Year's, probably the worst New Year's of my life if I'm gonna be completely honest. Like another bad moment I had in 2022 was like basically all the snowstorms that were hitting in like February and all that, trying to deal with that and not being able to do a lot of things because of the snowstorms, and then traveling anywhere was just really stressful to deal with if you had to travel anywhere. So I struggled with loneliness a lot this year, and not just that, but also at times it was like hard to find motivation to want to like film videos, and also like finding the motivation to want to go out and do things. Also, like throughout September and October, I was like kind of dealing with a lot of car problems and had to like figure out like how to get that resolved and all that, and it was kind of tough on me financially. So that was another part of 2022 that I wasn't really the biggest fan of and was a difficult time for me. The last major like tough part of 2022 for me was like having a really hard schedule that I was dealing with the last 2 months, and trying to like manage work along with like finishing up my semester in like late November, early December, and then holiday chaos in general and all that. So it was just a really tough schedule to deal with throughout the last 2 months of the year. So that was like the last major like hard part of 2022 that I had. So not everything was like all great this year, even though I made like a lot of videos that showed a lot of the highlights I had this year, but this year wasn't like all bad either. So there were good moments I had this year, and then there were like not so good moments I had throughout the year. So those were just like the major things I would have to say about 2022 for me. So now I'm going to be basically doing like a recap of each of the months I had this year. So I would say that January was like an okay month for me. I ended up like having another good birthday celebration where I go to like a couple of hiking places on my actual birthday, and then going to Great Wolf Lodge later in January, and I had a lot of fun going there and all that, not just Great Wolf Lodge, but like also getting to like see Kansas City again and see multiple different places throughout Kansas City area. So I'd have to say it ended up like being one of my favorite birthday celebrations I had, but the rest of January was pretty boring at times, and I had probably one of the worst New Year's of my life because of the wisdom teeth and all that. So I would have to say like January was kind of good and bad moments. I mean, I would have to say January was better than average for like any winter month that you can get. So, and out of all the winter months I had this year, January was probably my favorite month out of the winter season this year. Now I'm going to be moving into February, so overall I only had like a couple of like good days that whole month. One of those days being the day that I ended up like getting to go sledding and all that. Having the snow like storms every single week, it got less enjoyable having snow each time, and a lot of the storms had ice with them, which made the travel like really difficult to deal with, and it caused like a lot of stress considering that I had classes and work. It was just also a very boring and stressful month for me, and it went by the slowest out of any month this year despite it being the shortest month. It's kind of crazy to think about how like February is like the shortest month of the year, yet it still goes by slower than any other month of the year. So I would have to say it was definitely the hardest month for me to get through this year. So with March, it wasn't like too crazy of a month for me. I had a pretty bad spring break this year, and I also had like one day where like my phone broke and I had to like spend the whole day trying to get replaced, and it was just a pretty stressful day for me to get through, a really long and boring day. I'd rather have to spend my day like working and being at school than had to go through that because it was just generally stressful and just like a really long, slow moving day for me. Even though my spring break was really crappy this year, I did get to like go on a couple of like really nice day trips in March, and finally was starting to like get to see more daylight again, and we weren't having to like deal with as much snow as we were having to in February. So honestly, March could have been worse, but I mean, it still wasn't quite as good as like March of last year, but it definitely was better than March of 2020 when we were dealing with the lockdown and all that. So that's basically how I felt about March this year. So with April, I would have to say that it was an improvement from March, but I mean, it still wasn't too crazy of a month for me. It was a pretty decent month though, and I got to do even more like spring day trips in April than I did in March. Out of the first 4 months I had in 2022, I would have to say April was probably my favorite month that I had this year. For May, I would have to say that this year's May was a lot better than the May that I had last year. I finished my like spring semester of college and got to go skydiving and cliff jumping both on Friday the 13th. I also got to like visit this park in northern Illinois called Starved Rock for the first time, and the experience at that place was really amazing and just like was a really beautiful park to go and see for the first time. Things did kind of get boring in the second half of the month, but I still got to like do some stuff, and it was much better than the first 4 months I had, and definitely better than May of 2021. So basically how I felt about June overall is that it was a really amazing month for me. It was the best month I ever had in my life when it came to like luck with Kincaid Lake sessions, and I pretty much got to like go out there every single Saturday that month and got a good amount of jumps in each visit. And I had really good luck with weather with each of the visits I had out there in June, even with the drives home, which basically some visits of Kincaid Lake last year, I mean, it was pretty nice while I was at the lake, but there was one time where it ended up like raining while I was at the lake, which did make for a pretty cool video, and then also like some of the drives back home, I ended up like running in the rain, which was kind of stressful to deal with, especially since it was nighttime and all that. So this year with Kincaid Lake, especially in the month of June, I ended up like having really good luck with weather and didn't have any problems like driving home or at the lake or anything like that. So not just that, but I also did like a ton of awesome day trips that month, including Tom Saw, Casa River, Fugitive Beach, Johnson Shut-ins, and like many more places. So it was definitely better than June of last year and one of the best Junes I've ever had in my life. So basically how I felt about July this year is that July was another really good month that I had, and it wasn't quite as good as June though, and the last week of the month kind of sucked, along with like it getting excessively hot at times throughout the month. But I mean, I still was able to do some pretty awesome day trips in July, such as like going back to like that one park where you can get like pushed into a lake by a cool natural spring, and then it also has like that one castle structure at the place. And I also got to like see a couple really nice waterfalls in Indiana, and I also got to like visit places off of Highway 44 for a day, including a place where you get to see animals, and going to like see another cave in Missouri called Onondaga Cave. July was a pretty good month for me this year, especially if you compare it to how my life is right now. So basically, I would have to say August was the best month I had this year by far. Basically, I spent the first half of the month like going on this really awesome road trip, getting to like see places in like the southwestern part of the US. I got to see the Grand Canyon for the first time, and I also got to like see like many awesome places throughout Utah, and then got to like see some amazing places in Colorado as well, such as like some natural hot spring places. I got to see like the Rocky Mountains again, and got to go whitewater rafting at this place in Colorado, and got to see Gardens of the Gods, the Colorado version, for the first time. The second part of August wasn't quite as good as the first half, but I mean, I still got to do a lot of like fun stuff. It was overall a really amazing month for me, and probably the best August I've ever had in my life. So that's how I felt about August this year. So basically how I felt about September, I actually somewhat enjoyed September this year. I got to enjoy one last month at Kincaid Lake and had a lot of like decent sessions out there. I also ended up like having my best Kincaid Lake session ever that month, where I did like over 30 cliff jumps in that visit. It was another really good month for me with Kincaid Lake, beating past September's, and it almost beat June even. So It's just a really good month for Kincaid Lake along with June. The only thing I didn't enjoy was the fact that like school was getting challenging for me at times, and I was also having to like deal with trying to like get some things fixed on my car so that I could get like my plates renewed and all that. It was just pretty stressful having to manage that along with school, work, and trying to get the most out of like my last month that I could go out to Kincaid Lake before it gets like too cold to like go out there. And it was just like hard having to manage all of that at one time. So September could get pretty stressful for me at times, but even with all that stress happening that month, I still end up like making September a pretty good month for me. So basically how I felt about October was it wasn't quite as good as like the past few months I had, and school was starting to get a little bit harder for me. This year I ended up like getting to do a lot of like fall themed day trips and got to like see some of my favorite parks during the fall time, and one of the trips I ended up like doing for fall this year was like a return trip back out to Starved Rock, and it was just really awesome getting to see that place during the fall time. So still wasn't quite as good as like some of the summer months I had, but I would have to say that it was still a pretty decent month for me this year, and honestly, things are still pretty good in October. So basically how I felt about November this year was that it was a significant downgrade from like the recent months, including October. This is like the month where like my work schedule was starting to get harder for me, and the amount of day trips I did like was going downhill. I think I only ended up like getting to do one day trip that whole month, and it was like also like during the early part of November as well. So Thanksgiving was also pretty depressing for me this year. And also, like, things were really starting to get stressful for me at the end of the month, like trying to finish up my semester of school while adapting to the chaos of the Christmas season at work and all that. My YouTube upload schedule was pretty inconsistent that month, and I missed a lot of uploads that month. And I also, like, had to push a lot of my fall videos back because of, like, the crazy schedule I had that month. To be fair, I typically have bad luck with Novembers and have had past Novembers that have been like worse than this one even, especially like November 2018. If you guys like have watched some of my older videos, like if you guys watched the 2018 recap video, I kind of talked more about November 2018 and it just being like a terrible time for me. So, I mean, I've had worse Novembers in the past, but it's just this year wasn't really a good month for me again, so. And lastly, now I'm going to be like talking about how I felt about December. So honestly, it was a really stressful month for me, especially with like trying to finish up school at the very beginning of the month and then getting through like the holiday season this year. Just was not a good holiday season for me. I did get to do some fun Christmas activities though, and I had this one Friday I enjoyed where I went back out to the rocking chair and World's Largest Mailbox and all that. Other than that, this month has really sucked, and this has probably been my least favorite holiday season that I've ever had, even compared to like the holiday season of 2020. Not just that, but it's also like been the busiest holiday season in my life with me working a lot more, which is why I didn't get to like do as much like Christmas themed activities this year, and also why the Christmas video that I made this year was pretty disappointing compared to like past years, so I do want to apologize about that. This has probably been like the worst December of my life, other than like the last week of the month. I was just not a big fan of December this year or like the Christmas season this year. Hopefully next year I can have a better holiday experience than I did this year, so that's basically how I felt about each of the months I had this year. So now I'm going to be comparing this year to like the last year that I had, and then also like comparing it to 2020. So basically New Year's was way better in 2020 than in this year, and even last year's New Year's was better than this year. Even if like there not being too many ways to like celebrate because we were like dealing with like the like pandemic restrictions that New Year's, and there was not like a lot of like options like celebrate New Year's that year. I mean, at least like I wasn't like going through pain after like getting my teeth pulled out. So out of any New Year's I've had this decade so far, or just throughout my life in general, this is probably the worst New Year's I've ever had. When it comes to like my actual birthday, I would have to say that I enjoyed my actual birthday a little bit more in 2020 than any of the past years I've had. But I mean, this year's birthday I would say was better than last year because I got to like go to Union Station like right after like enjoying like a whole day of like going out hiking and all that. So I liked February a lot more in 2020 and last year than I did this year, but I would say that spring was much better this year than it was for me in 2020, but I would have to say like last year's spring was a little bit better than this year's spring. I feel like this year's summer was much better than last year's summer, and I would say it was comparable to summer 2020 even. Both this year and 2020 had unbeatable summers, and I also like the road trip experience I had this year more than last year's road trip experience, and I would even say it was about the same as like the Smoky Mountains trip that I went on in 2020, which that trip was a really awesome, memorable trip that I went on that year. Fall was a lot better this year than it was in 2020, and it was about the same as fall of last year, but I think it might have been even a little bit better this year just because of like how many like fall day trips I got to do this year. The only part of like the fall season that I did like more in 2020 than any other year was Halloween. Halloween of 2020, I would say it was a little bit better than the past two Halloweens I had. But other than that, like the fall season I had this year and last year was much better than fall 2020. And lastly, with the holiday season, I would have to say this year's holiday season was much worse than last year's holiday season, and even worse than the holiday season of 2020, which that year I didn't have a great holiday season either, but this year's season was just really bad for me. So if I had to like compare the year overall, I would have to say that this year was a slightly better year than 2020, because 2020 I was losing a lot of friends that year, and also like during the spring we had to be in a lockdown for like a couple of months, and that's just a really hard time period for me. This year I got to go on like a really awesome road trip, and I would say it was better than last year's road trip in a lot of ways. Every other season I had this year was either as good or better for me than in 2020, other than the winter season. So I'd have to say that 2022 was a little bit of a better year for me than 2020 was, but not by too much, honestly. So now I'm going to be like talking about like how I felt about 2022 as a whole. So I would have to say that 2022 started off not being too great with the crappy New Year's I had. Then it kind of like peaked up and was going really amazing during the warmer time period. And then kind of like after October ended, things were like starting to go sharply downhill again. For 2022, I had some really great time periods of the year, and I also had some really like crappy time periods of the year as well, especially during the last 2 months of this year. I would have to say that this year was a lot better than past years for me when it came to like what I was able to do this year, but also like stress wise and how I felt mentally at times, I would say it wasn't quite as good as like some of the past years I've had, especially like during the holiday season this year. I still wouldn't say that this year was an absolutely horrible year for me, even though I did have a lot of like rough moments throughout the year. Throughout my life, I've had years that went much worse than this year, so that's basically how I felt about 2022 as a whole. So basically for the last part of today's video, I'm going to be kind of going over some of the goals I met, and then goals I somewhat met, and then goals I didn't meet this year. Some of the major goals I did meet this year was working towards my dreams and continuing to like do good with YouTube, my classes, and other things throughout my life, so I would say that I accomplished that goal this year. I did pretty good in school both this past semester and like the spring semester that I had this year. And I also was doing pretty good with YouTube throughout like most of the year, other than maybe the last few months and like the early part of the year. But throughout most of the year, I was doing pretty good with being consistent on YouTube and all that, especially during the warmer season. I also kept things up with work as well. So I would say that I accomplished that goal this year. And I just like never gave up even when things became hard and stressful for me. Another goal of mine that I met this year was that I visited at least like one new state this year. I ended up like visiting 4 new states. I visited Oklahoma for the first time, Texas for the first time, New Mexico, and Arizona. And I like made some memories in each of the states I visited. I stopped at least one place in each of the states I visited. So I would say that I met that goal for this year. Another goal of mine that I met was like traveling to more places this year and doing another road trip. I would say that I met that goal for this year. So those were basically the goals that I feel like I fully met this year. So some goals I somewhat met this year. The first goal that I somewhat met this year was like continuing to do things that make me happy. I feel like I did that for like parts of the year, but at some moments I feel like I was kind of slacking with that. I feel like I haven't been doing a lot of things that make me happy during the last few months and all that. It's just been like a really hard time period for me, and just not a lot of motivation, and I feel like I somewhat met that goal this year. I feel like I did pretty good with it during the summertime and the early half of the year, but I feel like I've kind of like haven't been doing good with that the last few months. So another goal that I somewhat met was like continuing to upload more videos. I feel like I did good for like parts of the year, but within the last like few months, I feel like I feel like I've been kind of doing bad with uploading videos and haven't really been consistent and all that. So I feel like with that goal, I only somewhat met that goal. I don't feel like I fully met that goal this year, especially within the last few months and me like barely uploading videos compared to like how much I used to upload in the past. So now I'm gonna be going into the goals I didn't meet this year. So the first major goal that I didn't meet this year was like going harder with the summer adventures, because I feel like I didn't do quite as many like day trips to like newer places as I like hoped to this year, but I did go on like a road trip this year and got to see some new states. And I mean, when it comes to like just doing stuff around like the area, I feel like I just kind of like didn't feel motivated to like go out and see a lot of like newer places, and didn't like try as hard as I could have to try more new places out for the first time. So I also didn't meet the goal of mine to like go skydiving again twice this year. I only got to get like one skydiving trip in this year, because last year I ended up like going skydiving twice, so I didn't get to do as much skydiving this year as I did last year. So that was another goal that I didn't meet this year. So those were basically some of the goals I met this year and didn't meet this year. So now I'm gonna be going over some of my goals for 2023. So basically my first major goal for 2023 is like to try to visit some different places during the summer and like kind of make this summer a little bit different from like the past summers I had, because even though I had some pretty decent summers the past few years, I feel like I've been doing all of the same places each year. So I want to like try to add a little bit more variety this summer and try to do something different things this summer. I will stick to like visiting some of my favorite places again this coming up summer, but I just like want to add a little bit more variety this summer and try some different places this summer. So that's my first major goal for 2023. Another goal for 2023 that I have is like try out bungee jumping for the first time. It's not guaranteed that I'm gonna like make this happen next year, but it's definitely something I want to like try to have happen next year and try it out for the first time. But we'll just kind of like see how things go and like how expensive it is and just like where I could do it as well. So I'm not guaranteeing being able to do that next summer, but it'd be something cool to try out, and it's definitely a goal I will at least want to set even if I don't meet that goal next year. I always have like other years I can do as well, even if I feel like I can't get to it next year, at least like try to do it before like I die and all that. So another goal of mine this year is like go harder with the summer adventures than I have been like the past few years, and also to like do another road trip, possibly to the Northeast, or possibly even like do an extended West US road trip where I like do a combination of both the North and the Southwest, like some of my favorite places from both of those road trips. I don't know if I would be seeing Colorado on that road trip, but just like places I liked throughout the Southwest and then on the West Coast, and then basically back up to the Northwest to Seattle and all that. So basically I want to at least like try to do some kind of road trip again next year and try to make it as good as possible. If anything, just make it better than the road trip that I had in 2021. So that's another major goal that I have for 2023. Another major goal I have for myself next year is like keep it up with like school and working and all that, and just don't give up on anything even when it gets like really stressful and difficult. Try to like push through all the challenges like I did this year, and just like try to be the best version of myself next year. And the last major goal that I have for myself in 2023 is to try to make this coming up year like better than any other year that I had in this decade so far, and try to make it like the best year that I've ever had in my life. So that's basically my last major goal for myself in 2023. So this is about all I'm going to be doing for today's video. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you enjoy like all the videos that I filmed in 2022 and just getting to see all the memories I made this year. And I hope all of you guys watching this video had a really good year this year. And even if this year wasn't that great for you, I hope that 2023 will bring nothing but good things for you, and that 2023 will be like the best year that you have, and that you will accomplish a lot of stuff in 2023. And I hope 2023 will be a comeback for you guys, and it will be a really amazing year for all of you. So this is basically the 2022 recap video and pretty much how I felt about 2022 and everything that I accomplished this year, and just like bad things I had to go through and all that. So subscribe, keep my post notifications on to see you next. Stay tuned for more videos I'm going to be having out throughout 2023. I'm going to try to like make this the best year for myself on YouTube. So hoping to have some of the best videos out in 2023. So stay tuned for more videos coming out. Stay tuned for like possibly having like a New Year's celebration video, because I haven't really got to do much for New Year's the past 2 years. So I definitely want to try to do something for New Year's this year. So without further ado, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.